All right, hello and welcome to the Middle East Forum speaker webinar series. I'm Stacey Roman and I will be moderating this discussion today. We're pleased to have Abdullah Bozkurt, writing fellow here at the Middle East Forum and director of the Stockholm Center for Freedom, join us to discuss Turkey's overlooked campaign against critics. Mr. Bozkurt will speak for 15 minutes. If you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type out your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Abdullah Bozkurt.
Oh, thank you, Stacey. And thank you for the Middle East Forum for hosting this event and providing me an opportunity to speak on my country. Let me just start by laying out the outlook of how Turkey looks today. We have an Islamist government of President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, who has consolidated so much power in his hands, marginalized all the different factions within the ruling Justice and Development Party, overpowered the institutions of the Republic, transformed them into whips, political tools in the hands of the government, from the military to the intelligence to the judiciary. As a result of that huge transformation taking place in Turkey, and the policy decisions is pretty much based on the ideological motivation that is the main driving factor on the policy actions of the ruling party. And we have a ramification of that transformation seen pretty much in every places, not just on the foreign policy, but also the domestic side, from the economic policies to social policies to education policies. The school textbooks, for example, has been changed a lot. And the free and independent and critical media is pretty much decimated. They were either seized by the government or bought by the government, pro-government business people, and they pretty much are mouthpieces of the regime now. So as a result of that, you see Turkey is gaining a #1 position in the entire world as a jailer of the journalists. As of today, we have 175 journalists locked up in Turkish prisons on fabricated charges, from all ranging from defamation cases to counterterrorism charges. And pretty much no evidence to support all this very serious allegation, but nevertheless, they were thrown to the jail, prosecuted, actually persecuted by the judges and the prosecutors who are partisan of the regime. And we have 165 journalists like myself are forced to live in exile. We cannot return back to Turkey. Our relatives and families, friends, they are suffering on account of what we do. So intimidation campaign of the Erdoğan government reaches beyond the Turkish borders. It's not just confined to Turkey. And this is only one example, of course. We see the crackdown on all the different sectors, not just the journalists, human rights defenders, researchers, academics, but also diplomats, the generals, police chiefs, judges and the prosecutors, who are not aligned with the overriding ideology of the Erdoğan regime. They were targeted. They were prosecuted, imprisoned, and the numbers are staggering. For example, in the foreign service, we have 30% of all the diplomats, including a high-profile ambassador who served, distinguishedly in various positions around the world. They were purged without any administrative or the judicial investigation. They were branded terrorists overnight, and they were purged from the service. And they were replaced by the political hacks appointed by the Erdoğan regime. So that's why we see the Turkish embassies and the consulates around the world not just doing the diplomatic work or the providing consular services, but actually working as spies, collecting information on the critics, dissidents, and opponents living in those countries around the world, from Europe to the United States, from Asia to Africa. And they were passing this information back to Turkey And the result of this huge intelligence gathering against the critics is very serious. Not only they face abusive criminal justice prosecution, but also their family members and their friends also face legal actions on account of what they do beyond the Turkish borders. So I mean, in the Turkish military, which is the second largest military force in the NATO in terms of manpower, can we imagine 80% of all the generals and admirals, they were purged. They were simply pushed out. And when you look at the profile of those generals and the admirals, most of them actually had nothing to do with the failed coup attempt, which I believe is a false flag operation back in 2016. Most of them served in various NATO positions around the Europe, from Norway to Italy, Germany, or the United States. So they were specifically targeted because of, they are pro-NATO or pro-Western officers in the Turkish military. And they were replaced by the Islamists or the neo-nationalists. So Erdogan is pretty much transformed the Turkish military into a political tool in the hands of his regime as well. So that's what we are facing when we look at the Turkey. So personally, as a journalist living in Sweden, I face threats all the time because of the long arm of Erdogan regime operating in Sweden. But I mean, not just me, but many other people in different countries, they also face a similar threats, threats of assassination, going after the family and the friends back in Turkey. In my case, 80-year-old of my mother, she was questioned, dragged to the police station, detained for a day on my account. My father-in-law, 79 years old, he was charged all kind of fabricated charges, spent some time in the jail, and he got convicted. And the case still in the appeal pending. But it's most likely the decision, the conviction will be upheld, and he will be going back to the prison. So this is, this is how they operate, and the main motivation behind this is to kill the counter narrative, because when inside Turkey you only hear one story. It's very much anti-Western, very anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, very xenophobic narrative pumped to the Turkish population all the time. From the TV networks, from the print media, from the web portals controlled by the government. So they only hear one story. When the journalists like myself, living in exile and still trying to work on the journalism field, come up with a counter narrative, shed a light with the facts and the truth, Erdogan regime, becomes terrified. So they want to silence me and many others in exile, using different tactics. We got profiled by the Turkish embassy, we got tracked and monitored by the Turkish intelligence agency, and sometimes got threatened by the networks, sometimes Islamist networks, not necessarily Turkish ones, by the way, because for the first time we see, I think, a Turkish government trying to curry favors in the non-Turkish Muslim groups, basically on the Muslim Brotherhood network, sometimes Jamaat Islamiye, and at the extreme level on the Al-Qaeda networks. So they use these networks to intimidate journalists like myself and many other critics living outside of Turkey. So the ultimate goal is to force us to stop writing, speaking up, or speaking against the Turkish government with the facts and the truth. If you look at the pattern of the behavior, you will detect very much similarity with what the Iranian mullah regime has been doing for decades. And this similarity is not random, by the way. It's not just the Islamist government, but also when you look at the key people, the profile of the key people at the senior positions in the government, They grew up fantasizing about the Iranian Revolution back in 1980s and 90s. And these people, clustered around different networks in Turkey, are in a position of influence today. Just give you an example: President Erdogan's chief advisor, Sefer Turan, who advises Erdogan on Turkish relation with the Middle East, North Africa, Muslim countries. This guy used to work back in the 90s in a magazine financed by the Iranian intelligence. And many people in this organization actually convicted in 2000. They served some time, and this guy grew up with this ideology. Now he's in key position to make an impact on the policy decision of the Turkish government. He even joined at one time. I will be publishing soon that article. Israel needs to wipe out from the face of the earth. That was an event organized by the Iranian consulate in Istanbul in 90s, and this Erdogan's chief advisor was one of the key speakers at the event. So I mean, we can provide more examples, including the head of the Turkish intelligence, Hakan Fidan, as well. So the similarity is not random. They replicate the same template. They learn from the Iranian regime and try to intimidate and even kill the critics living outside of Turkey. So that's how they do it. Not only controlling the narrative, but also undermining the integrity and the credibility of the journalists living in exile by publishing all kind of defamatory smear articles in the Turkish media. But again, as I said, not many people are willing to speak up, considering the series of the threats, and given the fact that hundreds, tens of thousands of the people, they were thrown into jail, they were prosecuted. They don't want to risk their safety, so they come after you when you write very critical articles based on the investigative pieces on the Erdogan government, expose the wrongdoings in their government, how they have been interacting with the radical jihadist organization, not just in Syria and Libya, but around the world in many places. They don't like that, so they come after you with everything they got to silence you. And I refuse to do that. And I am very much appreciative of the Middle East Forum to put out a statement in support of me when another advisor of President Erdogan, threatened on a television networks, asking Turkish intelligence to assassinate me in Sweden. So I mean, many journalists actually need this kind of supports around the world, so they can continue doing their job, knowing that there are some people out there who care about the Turkey, who care about the journalists, who are still trying to do their own profession. With that, perhaps I will stop there and I will entertain questions from the audience.
All right, thank you so much. We really appreciate you speaking with us. The first question in from one of our viewers is, Turkey had a close relationship with Israel and was on its way to first world status. Can you discuss the forces in Turkey that reversed this trajectory?
Well, I think 2010, this flotilla incident is the breaking point when it comes to the relation with Israel and Turkey. But looking at the ideology that Erdogan has subscribed for a long time, he is very much anti-Semitic, but he wasn't revealing that face publicly for years because the institutions in Turkey were intact. They were standing against his ideology. So he was afraid of putting that trajectory for the Turkish government at the time. But one of the very serious facts I was able to discover in the investigative work in an IRGC Quds Force investigation that was launched back in 2010. And in one of the key piece evidence in that investigation came out from a member of the parliament who told Erdoğan when NATO discussed putting a radar installation in Turkey, close to the southern border in Malatya, against Russian and basically Iranian threats, missile threats. Erdoğan privately said this member of the parliament, this was part of the court case file, is the evidentiary file. He said, I don't have enough power today, but I'm gonna, screw the Americans, NATO, and Israel when I have enough power in my hands. So privately, he was communicating this message to his core supporters. And after 2011 election, when he was, he got a huge majority, and then, with a failed coup attempt, he was able to purge so many government employees from the senior positions. Now we see the real face of Erdoğan. So the main motivation here is ideology. Yes, Erdoğan acts practically from time to time, but that's only for the tactical purposes. When he feels confident enough, he's going to go back to his true self. Today we hear a lot of discussion and reports that Erdoğan tried to mend the fences with Israel, but he's not sincere in that. He's only for tactical because of the new administration in the United States and the European pressure. He thinks, by causing up to Israel, he may ease that pressure on his government. But basically, I think he's very much anti-Semitic guy. And he's doing everything in his power to spread that anti-Semitism, I think, in Turkey. You can see pretty much clearly, every day on the television networks or the print media controlled by the regime.
Thank you. Does Turkey still have any desire to join the European Union, or is that all over now?
Well, the negotiation halted for a long time ago. There is no opening of the chapters at all. From the Turkish perspective, I don't see a real interest from the Erdoğan government to join the club. The only motivation for him to pursue this, negotiation is for the economic and the trade benefits. On the political values, for example, human rights, fundamental rights, freedom as such, he doesn't care about it at all. But since the European Union is composed of almost 60% of the Turkish exports, and most of the foreign direct investment coming from the European Union, he cannot simply, push that away. But he said it publicly many times. He doesn't want
I think we lost you.
Oops, I cut off there for a while.
I had faith you'd come back. All right, I think we lost you while you were answering that question.
Right.
Just a few seconds ago. But we can move on. Should NATO be put on probation, should Turkey be put on probation in NATO and deprived of its vote and veto there?
Well, I mean, the NATO on the procedural wise, it operates on the unanimous decision. There's no mechanism, of course, to kick out the member from the NATO, unless the member itself decides to leave the NATO, as in the case of Greece and France in the past. But from whatever angle you look at the Turkish government behavior, they have been undermining the NATO actions and the policies in many fronts. The purchase of the S-400 long-range missiles is a prime example of that. And threatening to shut off the base, denied access to NATO in different bases in Turkey. And many other fronts from Syria to Libya is not really working with the NATO, informing them in advance actions that Turkish military is taking. I mean, there are so many different examples that we can provide here that Turkey is not actually aligning with the not just the NATO values, which is based on the democratic values, but also the military policies as well. And so many jihadist groups came through Turkey to Syria. I actually published a confidential NATO document stating that almost 90% of the ISIS and Al Qaeda guys came to Syria through Turkey, not from Jordan or any other bordering countries. So this shows how Erdogan government has tolerated, also aided, actually abetted these radical groups, especially Al Qaeda groups. I mean, there are so many documentary evidence out there. Some of them I published shows that Turkey is not really aligned with the NATO. When the NATO is trying to crack down on the ISIS and other jihadist groups in Syria and Iraq, Turkey is undermining that. So many foreign fighters, with the help of the Turkish intelligence, by the way, they came through Turkey, not face any crackdown at all. The Turkish intelligence knew everything about these guys. They were monitoring their communication as such, but they were simply, looking the other way. Sometimes they're actually helping them out, providing a treatment, providing a logistical support to these groups. I think as of today, Turkey, especially with the huge transformation of the Turkish military after the failed coup attempt, when you see, the purge of almost all the pro-NATO officers from the Turkish military, I mean, it's very difficult to explain how the Turkish government is really a member of the NATO as of today. I think effectively, in effective terms, Turkey is not really a member of the NATO. For tactical purposes, of course, they cooperate from time to time, as we have seen, recently in the Black Sea with the American military. But as I said, these are only for the tactical purposes. I think on the strategic level, Erdogan has no interest at all to be a member of either a European Union or the NATO.
Thank you. So Erdogan is moving the country toward an Islamic state. What is the majority view of the public in that regard, and how do you see tensions evolving?
Well, that goes back to the original, introductory points that I raised. Unfortunately, we don't have a critical, independent, or opposition media left in Turkey. They were decimated. I used to work the largest national daily in Turkey. It was seized in 2016, before the failed coup attempt, by the way. So the crackdown started in 2013 and 14 on the independent media. So when you don't see a counter narrative out there, almost all the Turkish people, they hear only one story, the government story. They see the Western powers. Not just the Western powers, by the way, this hostile attitude sometimes pointed at the direction of Russia, sometimes China, but most of the time against Western democracies, of course. And they read these stories, they hear this narrative, they don't see alternative facts or the real stories, so they go along with the Turkish government narrative. And I think the only thing they can make this difference when it comes to Turkey is economic and the financial situation, which Turkey is feeling, the pinch at that front. Many Turks, it's very difficult for them to make the ends meet with the economy going, downward spiral. With the wrong policy choices, by the way. And on the foreign policy front, of course, Erdogan is, bullying the neighboring countries and many others. The Turkish businesses are actually making a trade. So that has an impact on the Turkish exports and the foreign trade as well. But on the political side, there's only one story in Turkey. The only alternative is on the social media, Twitter, perhaps Facebook, and even on that front, they try to crack down. If you look at the Twitter transparency report, for example, issued on a 6-month basis, um, over 90% of the court judgments asking the Twitter to censor the content come only one country, Turkey, in the entire world. So that shows the intensity of the crackdown when it comes to the social media as well. So that's the only outlet for now, but not many people, of course, access to the internet and the social media. They watch the Turkish TVs, and most of them they're getting the information from there, which is controlled by the government, of course.
Are there any non-COVID travel restrictions on ordinary Turkish citizens now, for example, for political reasons?
There are some restrictions depending on the how the pandemic, of course, progress in Turkey. But I mean, we see Erdoğan government holding political conventions every day in different provinces, and that those restrictions do not apply to the ruling party or the Erdoğan's people. It's amazing, actually. Erdoğan just the other day he was praising this convention. I don't remember which province was that, but he said even under the pandemic conditions, look at how many people gathered in that convention hall. So the restriction actually is not applying to the powerful people in the government. But in terms of the COVID data, they actually hiding a lot of information, the cases. Some of them leaked to the public in the past, and it involved a discussion with the World Health Organization on the credibility of the data coming out of Turkey. As in many cases, of course, they fabricate the numbers as they fabricate the stories for the Turkish population, because Erdogan is very much terrified that this pandemic, coupled with economic and financial difficulty, with the people losing their jobs, their homes, that may grow a huge opposition bloc against his government when the election time comes. So that's why they try to manipulate and contain and the data, including the inflation and unemployment figures issued by the Turkish government statistical bureau. All these numbers are manipulated, unfortunately, in Turkey. We don't see the real figures.
Are regular Turkish citizens given incentives by the current government to behave in ways that are conspicuously Islamic? For instance, is there any penalty for women who do not wear headscarves?
No, not officially, but there are unannounced rules, of course. If you subscribe this ideology, then you get promoted in the ranks in the government very quickly. And you get appointed to the positions even though your credentials are not qualified enough for you to get that position. So the ideology is the number one, I think, factor when it comes to entering into government jobs. And that has a trickle-down impact on the private sector as well, of course. Many people you'll see in the board of directors, major businesses, they're appointing Islamist guys to be able to smooth out their relation with the government, even though they are operating on the private sector, and some of them perhaps getting contracts and the tenders from the government, and they want a favorable treatment. So not only in the government sector, but also private area, many Islamist guys actually, popping out in the board of directors, in the senior positions of the major firms in Turkey. So the headscarf issue is not officially, there is a rule, but unofficially, not just a headscarf, because the men don't wear headscarf, but if they subscribe the Erdogan government Islamist ideology, they have an open field in that sector.
Thank you. And in our last few minutes here, what do you see as a solution to this ongoing problem? Is there one, and can anything be done?
As I said, I mean, the fundamental rights, freedoms, human rights, they are important issues, but the general public, they don't care about it. They only get mobilized when they see the pinch in their budget. I think the only factor that the Erdogan government cannot control is economic and the financial outlook of Turkey. In addition to COVID, of course, the pandemic. On the other front, they can control the narrative in the media. They can, steer the public in one direction. But economic and financial difficulty, even with the manipulated figure from the statistical agency, people feel the impact on their lives on a daily basis. I think Erdogan government has been failing to deliver on that front. They did very good in the first and the second term, until 2011 perhaps, but now we see, a sliding back on the economic front. The unemployment is rising, the inflation is on the rise, the Turkish lira is losing value very fast, and that has a huge impact on the general population. I think that's why Erdogan is very much concerned now, and he tried to smooth out relations with the EU, but he's having very difficulty balancing out with the ideological motivation he has been harboring in his head. I think the only solution that I see in the medium and the long run, Erdogan cannot control a large country like Turkey with 86 million people in terms of population, cannot deliver the finances and the economic needs of the Turkish people with this political trajectory. Because when you bump heads with every regional countries, not just Israel, Egypt and Greece. If you look at the map, I mean, Turkey has very bad relation pretty much every neighboring country. And beyond that, of course, in the traditional, transatlantic alliance partners that serve Turkey, provide security for Turkey for decades, from the United States to the European allies. They are very much concerned with the Erdogan government. Very bad relations, very different problematic areas opened on that front with the Americans and the Europeans, and the Russian and Chinese as well. I mean, the Gulf countries, of course. So when you see this, Turkey is very much insulated and isolated at the regional level and the global level. It will be very, very difficult and perhaps the mission impossible for Erdogan government to continue to deliver the social services, economic benefits to the general population. And in the end, I think the Turkish people will rebel, and he's going to be paying the price for that.
Thank you so much. And can you just tell our viewers where we can find some more of your work?
Sure. My investigative work is pretty much focused on the Nordic Monitor. It's very much on the exclusive stories I put out every day on that website, nordicmonitorweb.com. And it's based on the documentary evidence I managed to find out. So if people, can also, if they know Turkish, of course, they can read the documentary, the original documents themselves, and they can make up their minds and see, where Turkey is heading, the profile of the key people who have influence on the policy decision in the Turkish government. That will be, I think, a great website, I think.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Unfortunately, we've come to the close of our webinar. For our viewers, please be on the lookout for our weekly webinar offerings email coming out over the weekend. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.